Hello and welcome to In Focus with Insight. My name is Pamela Hellig. I'm head of Inside Life Solutions, and this is an episode of the Open Books series in which we get to know fascinating and inspiring individuals in the actuarial community through the books that they have read and love. Today, I'm joined by David O'Brien. David is an actuary and social entrepreneur with a career spanning 34 years and 4 countries. He is the founder and managing director of Meerkat, which is a business that delivers financial wellness through simple solutions delivered by digital technology. He serves as a board member of African Bank and chairman of the African Bank Model Risk Committee, responsible for the governance of the risk models in the bank. He's also a member of the board of trustees of the Learning Initiative, which is an NPO that uses occupational, speech, and other therapy to improve early childhood development in underdeveloped children. David is married and a proud father to 3 children, aged 27, 17, and 15. Welcome to the podcast, David.
Thank you, Pamela. Thank you for having me here. I will do my best to be inspirational.
And fascinating.
And fascinating, yes.
Tell me, are you a reader?
I am a reader, but I have realized that I have an addiction. My name is David. I am an addict. And the addiction is that I buy more books than I will ever read. And initially this was causing me stress because obviously they mount up. And then I recently read a piece about Umberto Eco, who is an author, I suppose an academic, and he has a library of 40,000 books. And he says that your library is just something that you dip into every day, and that whether you've read the books or not read the books or reread the books, it doesn't matter, that it's your library. So that has now calmed my addiction down, but now I just need to buy more bookshelves.
Whatever it takes to help you sleep at night.
Exactly.
Is that your only shopping addiction? I mean, given your knowledge of our debt and debt management.
Clearly you can tell by my fashion choices that it must be. I have a little bit of a passion for classic cars, but it's very difficult to turn that into a purchasing addiction on a salary. So books is probably my vice.
Okay.
And food. I do like good food.
What's your favorite restaurant in Cape Town, or the last one you've been to that you'd recommend?
We like Foxcroft. You know what you're getting. Any of the chef's warehouses. We had a nice date in Tali the other evening. And I'm always fascinated, the lead chef in Chef's Warehouse is an Irishman, but his ability to have different cuisines as the feature of the given restaurants, I think is really brilliant.
Good choice. I think maybe we can do a restaurant recording after the book recording. Something I can talk about for ages as well.
Very happy to go to restaurants, but yes, we can talk about that.
Okay, well, before we get more into the restaurants and into the books and the reading, tell me, what is keeping you busy these days?
Cool. Well, so I think maybe it might be of interest to some of the listeners is I've chosen to be an entrepreneur as opposed to a corporate employee actuary. And as an entrepreneur, you're busy all the time. So, whatever the challenges are, but at the moment, so we're going to get the team down together and have a nice reset. So I'm quite excited about that.
Well, you also describe yourself as a social entrepreneur. What does that mean to you?
So I have a friend of mine who's an academic in studying small businesses, and I debated a long debate with her about that. I think a social entrepreneur accepts a cap to profit or return on capital. So it's not unbridled capitalism as witnessed by Mr. Musk. I think it's more about saying that, as a business, you need to meet your expenses, and that in turn builds a lifestyle for your employees, but that to a point, there is then a return on capital to reward for the risk. But above that, you should actually share it back to your customers. So I'm a big fan of mutual companies. Sadly, they don't seem to be a thing so much anymore. But I think a mutual insurance company is probably the epitome of what an insurance company should be.
Have you reached that cap yet?
God, no. That's a different conversation. But
maybe Elon also has a cap. He just also hasn't reached it.
I think Elon has a cap of another planet. And that's maybe just for his ego.
Well, we call the Open Book series the Desert Island Discs for Bibliophiles, which means we've asked you to bring a selection of books along which have shaped you in some way. So we'll be talking about those in between, talking about your journey and your career and so on. Before we get into books themselves, I'd like to warm up by asking you some questions about your reading habits. So this is a bit of a philosophical question, which I'm interested to see how you interpret. But do you think that reading is a virtuous pursuit?
I think the acquisition of knowledge is virtuous. I think for many centuries, we could only as humans acquire knowledge through either experience or reading. I suppose reading gives you a window into somebody else's experience. Obviously these days, well, I suppose we're still reading in terms of consuming media digitally. But yeah, I definitely think books are virtuous, I think books are really important, and I think the habit of reading is important.
Why is it important? Isn't it more important than consuming knowledge through other media?
So again, I despair at the, let's call it the bite-sized culture that our children are growing up in. So, YouTube videos, 20 seconds, Instagram Reels, 20 seconds. If anything is longer than 20 seconds, you've lost their attention because they just haven't developed, let's call it the character or the tenacity to stay the course. So, if you're reading The Lord of the Rings and you're doing it in 20-second bites, it'll be a long time before you finish the book. And I don't think it's good that our kids have got that rapid feeding. I don't know if they can even sit through a full movie anymore. And that's a bad thing. So reading, yes, or, a long documentary, but as against a bite-sized acquisition of knowledge.
Okay. And what makes a book a 5-star read for you?
Cool. I think books are a bit like wine. Everybody has an opinion on what's good and bad wine. For me, it boils down to whether I like it or not. So I'm quite broad in my book taste. I would pretty much read anything. So having, when I close a book, if I go, yeah, I enjoyed that, that's a good sign of a good book. Obviously, you have the unputdownable books, but for me, that means at 3:00 at night when I finish the last page, I'm delighted to finish the book, but it's now 3:00 in the morning, and that's not a good thing. But yeah, so I think if you enjoy it, if you read the book, it's great if it has a message. But there's such a range of books from stories to business to educational. So I think it just depends on the nature of the book.
And you read them all genres?
I read them all. I am, everything.
Okay. And can you describe your perfect reading setting?
Oh, so I recently took my wife to Ireland. We went on a bit of a road trip with my parents in September, and I'll talk to my Irishness in a minute. But as a kid growing up, I remember September being the best month because you kind of still had summer and long days, and it wasn't too cold. It rained every day in Ireland for my trip. But one day I was sitting in an ironically cold sunroom, and the rain was bucketing down and hitting these glass panels. And I was looking out on a very stormy setting sea. It was in the west of Ireland. And I had a book. And I thought, I'd like a room like this to read books in. This is a great place to read books. And I've subsequently seen some comments from people living in the Northern Hemisphere who that's how they like to read. So for me, it's a seat in a quiet space, a nice environment.
Very Hugo. Do you remember that word that was trending a few years ago? Like a Danish word for coziness.
I must have missed that. But I will bow to your better knowledge.
Got my finger on the pulse of pop culture. Okay, so let's get into the books. Which is the first one we're going to talk about?
So I found this journey. So for those of you who want to come on this podcast, Pamela makes you pick 5 books. It's really difficult, or it was for me.
Some people cheat.
So I actually nearly came with 10 or 15. And then I literally had a pile of 15 as my in selection, and I'm whittling it down, whittling it up. And then I went, look, I also discovered I'm missing some books. So it prompted me to send some messages to some friends. Have you got this book? But so what I came down to was themes. So I've realized in my reading, one of the themes I enjoy is 20th century history, but not the history of the statesmen, the history as to how the average person experienced that event, whatever that might be. So I've read some really good books about the World War I, and coming from Ireland, our political history around that time is quite interesting. But yeah, so that theme of history, and obviously the 20th century is close enough to feel real, but unfortunately dominated by 2 world wars. And I think war is a terrible thing. And we can talk a little bit about some of my passions in that. But yes, so the first book is called Stirlings Men, written by a man called Gavin Mortimer. I brought this along, not for this story, although it has some fascinating insights in it, but for more the history and bravery. So I'm quite, my wife thinks I have a funny character, but often when I'm reading some stories, I'm quite fascinated by the Victoria Cross. Have you ever heard of the Victoria Cross? So the Victoria Cross is the highest award for bravery in the British Army. Actually, I suppose the British Navy, Great Britain, because they give it to Navy as well. And the medals are bronze. Okay, so simple, not inherently valuable, but they are made from the bronze from 2 cannons that were taken at Sevastopol. Now, Sevastopol was a battle between the Russians, I think it was the Russians, might have been the Turks and the British, and you will have heard of the charge of the Light Brigade. So oh, you haven't, oh, good Lord. So the Sevastopol battle had the charge of the Light Brigade. They captured these 2 cannons. Those cannons have now been melted down to make medals.
When was that?
Mid-1800s.
Okay.
So the charge of the Light Brigade was a cavalry charge.
Yeah.
But they
Cavalry mean with horses?
On horses with swords. Unfortunately, they were charging machine guns. So it didn't end very well.
For the horses also.
Anybody. Anyway, but the Victoria Cross I find quite fascinating, particularly the people who have won it. And it has led me to think a little bit about bravery and what it means for people. And obviously in wars, bravery is often a thing. But I think it suits politicians and kings to have medals and to champion people who are brave because it serves the purposes of their war engine. But increasingly when I look at these people who win these medals, brave undoubtedly, but they're definitely not actuaries in terms of assessing risks. And sometimes I wonder whether the bravery is because they didn't think about the risk or that they did. In some instances, you've seen people who they know they're going to die. It's a self-defeating thing, but they do it anyway because it saves other people. And that's, I find, quite fascinating. But yes, so the bravery in battle, the World War II, and they basically went behind enemy lines and destroyed things. And you see it now in movies, but they were the first guys to launch or to take a Jeep and to put a heavy machine gun on the back of the Jeep so that they were fast but had firepower. And they would then go behind the German lines and find an airfield, and the Germans would have their planes parked on the airfield. And then they would basically destroy the planes. But they didn't just like knock a wing off that could be repaired. They destroyed all the planes. And he has the record as a soldier for destroying the most German aircraft in the war. And that's a pretty effective process because if you in battle, air power is what the thing is, if you can destroy their air power. But as an individual, he was a lunatic, like a full-on certifiable lunatic. And I think war brings some of those guys to the fore because there are no constraints.
So shine.
Yes, so he achieved phenomenal things, and the SAS was formed by a bunch of renegades. They were pulled from different regiments, put together, given these special equipment, special training. They were the best of the best. And even today, the SAS are the creme de la creme of the British Army. They're called the Special Air Service. There's also an SBS, which is a special boat service. The piece I want to talk about this book, and it comes back to this theme of bravery. So they formed the squad, and they are doing parachute training. And if you've ever been crazy enough to jump out of a plane, which I'm pretty sure most actuaries won't, there's a thing called static line where there's a scene in the movies where they pull the ripcord. Obviously, most people, we couldn't get to the ripcord, we might fall to the earth. So what they do is you jump out of a plane if there's a parachute club and they have a static line. So you're hitched to a railing on the plane, and the act of jumping out effectively pulls the chute. It doesn't expand immediately, but I don't know how the mechanics work. But this idea that you can, and that's what they use in war, 20 guys jump off the back of a plane, they're all on these static lines pulling out clips as they jump. So there was a training, I could read the whole thing, but it's quite long, so I won't. So the first guys go up in the plane to jump, and we'll say there's 6 of them. And these are highly trained men, they've been put together, and now they're doing this parachute jump. And the guys on the ground are looking up, and the plane gets to its required height, and the first guy jumps out, and his chute doesn't open. And he plummets to the ground to his death. And the next guy jumps out, and his chute doesn't open.
Oh my word.
And they all jumped out, and none of them survived. And the plane comes back down, and the next batch have to get in the plane. Okay? Now, the one guy, luckily, thought to himself, there's a pattern here. And they discovered that there was an issue with the static line, that there was a kink in the rail or whatever, and it wasn't working correctly. But they didn't know that until they got on the plane. And still 6 men got on that plane to go up for a training exercise. This wasn't in battle. This was a training exercise, having witnessed 6 of their peers and friends plummet to their death. Now, I don't know if that's bravery or a single-minded purpose, but I just think it shows an amazing depth of character in the men that would be prepared to do that, which is probably why they were selected for the SAS in the first place. But it's fascinating to me.
So speaking of 20th century history, can you tell me about your upbringing, especially as an Irishman, and how you ended up in South Africa?
So yeah, so that's thank you for that segue. So
Smooth.
yeah, very smooth. So yeah, I think part of the reason that I decided to come along and share some time with you is my story is different. And in fact, this morning I had coffee with a young lady who wants to become an actuary. And for me personally, I'm very passionate about the profession. It's been very good to me personally. And specifically, if we take me as an example, so unfortunately I'm very old. So I predate when ASA had their own exam system. So when,
But I.
excellent. But you look a lot younger than me. So I did the institute exams, obviously. And at that time, the institute exams were the de facto exams in South Africa, Australia, I presume India, Kenya, basically the British Empire. And I was sitting in my office one day and I thought to myself, I think I'd like to travel. So I do like to travel.
Well, just back in Ireland at this time.
No,
Oh,
it's a specific story. So okay, let's dial it back a bit. For the career, I grew up in Ireland.
whereabouts?
County Meath, which is on the east coast, just outside Dublin.
Yeah.
I went to a boarding school, which might feature in my story later. And then from there, I went to university in London, which is quite unusual. So there was no actuarial degree courses in Ireland. It was even very, I found South Africa quite interesting that actuaries were kind of known. People would know actuaries. And I think it was because it was seen as the premier profession to aspire to if you had a bright kid. Whereas in Ireland at the time, completely unknown. And there were no degree courses in Ireland. That has subsequently changed. But to become an actuary in Ireland, you went straight from school into, let's call it Old Mutual, for want of a large, big insurance company. You put on a little ill-fitting suit, and then you started working through the institute exams from one. So no exemptions.
No tertiary education.
Straight from school. And that was the path for many actuaries. And that was kind of, I suppose, the path, if I wanted to be an actuary, which I did, that was what I would follow. And I met a man, I went to visit people, talk about their profession. And he said to me that if I had to beg, borrow, or steal, I must go to university. And that was quite profound for me. Bill, thank you, Bill. And yeah, so then, and here's where I think fate deals you a hand that you might think is bad, but in hindsight is good. So heaven forbid, but I got a B in maths. Now, to put that into context, in Ireland, they run a points-based system to get into university, and it is a universal, so the whole country there's a centralized clearing application system for the universities. And the maximum points you could get was 32 points because they count 6 subjects, but maths, an A in maths was worth 7 points. So that was 5 6s plus 7. Right? All right? Yes. No, 5. Got that wrong. 6 in total. So 5 5s. 5.
Okay, that gets us to 32.
Okay, right. See, I'm not good at numbers. And maybe that's why I failed maths. So I got a B in maths, but I had an otherwise perfect matric, matric equivalent. And in fact, one of the things I'm proud of, I got an A in English, which was very rare at the time because English was a subjective subject. I'm very proud of that. But I was sitting there with the concept that and it was common in Ireland, if you didn't get enough points for your chosen degree, you would resit your leaving cert. So you would take another year.
Oh, gosh.
You would do it again. You would then be able to cherry pick the best of the different subjects. But what often happened over the last 20 years is that the kid would resit the leaving cert, and that's the Irish matric, and the points would lift. So they would do another year of school, possibly get better points, but still not have enough for their chosen degree. Anyway, so I'm standing there at the results board going, oh Lord, I think I'm going to have to resit my matric. And my peers around me are going, you're kidding me. You can get into anything you want. Oh, and one fact I've missed. To start the journey as an actuary in an insurance company straight from school, the minimum requirement was an A in honors maths.
Okay.
So I couldn't now go to Irish life and put on my bad suit and start studying. So I was forced to go to university. And luckily enough, I had done some inquiries in the UK, where there were 4 universities at the time. This shows how old it was. 4 universities did actuarial degrees, and one of which was the one I ended up going to, which was City University in London. And, unfortunately, because I got the B in maths, I had to go to university. But I'm very passionate about attending university. There's a famous Irish, well, he's actually English, but he was a Catholic cardinal called Cardinal Henry Newman, who founded UCD, which is Dublin's university. Well, to be specific, Dublin's Catholic university. And he wrote a sequence of essays when he was founding the university about that a university is not about studying and subjects and exams, but it's actually about putting young people together and learning the first steps of society. So he believed that it was more important to go to university to start building your social structures than necessary to come out with a profession, which I feel quite passionate about. I think university, so again, thank you to Bill, I think university is important from that perspective, that it just gives young people a grounding to move forward in life. Yeah.
So I often get asked by students in the final year of undergrad, should I do honors or should I go into the working world? What would you tell those students?
Okay, so that's alien to me because we don't do that. I'll tell you what my experience was. So in Ireland, they do 4-year degrees, which I suppose is here basic plus honors would be a 4-year degree.
Yeah, except UCT Business Science, which I don't know if that's a thing anymore for actuarial science, but yeah, I did a 4-year degree.
They've just changed a bit, I think. But so when I hear people talking, I assume it's 3 + 1 making 4.
Yeah.
And the Irish leaving certificate is educationally equivalent, I think, to the matric here. So therefore a 4-year degree makes sense. And so I think university is good. I think it's worth finishing the program. And I think honors, the discipline of the self-study and the producing the thesis, which I think is part of the honors, I think it's good discipline. I'm not sure people should be professional students, as in doing degree after degree after degree. But yeah, I think I would recommend honors.
So circling back, you were at your office, I presume, having finished your degree, either in London or Ireland or...
So I'm very proud of this. So when I went to university in London, my parents just about could afford to send me there. And I heard about the concept of a bursary. There was guys in my university who were doing a 1-year postgrad. So there was the university offered a 1-year postgrad where you could get, I suppose, what would be the 100 series exams in one go. Okay. And some corporates realized that this was cheaper than letting the guys slog through 6 exams. So they were sponsoring guys to go. I met a guy doing this. He's now a fairly illustrious actuary. And I asked him who his sponsor was in the company. And I wrote that person a letter and said, listen here, I'm doing an undergraduate degree. And yes, it's going to take me 2 more years from now, but I will come out with the same exemptions he has. And if you spread his money over 2 years, it's enough for me. Let's do that. And apparently the man was quite struck by my entrepreneurial spirit and gave me a unique bursary for me, the first one they'd ever done to an undergraduate program. So I got that. The benefit of that was when I graduated, I was forced to go and work for them, which also turned out to be a real lucky win because when I graduated, it was 1998 and there was a stock market crash and everything was going into recession. And some of my peers struggled to get jobs. And unfortunately, I had to go to my company. So I had a guaranteed job, which made my life very easy.
As someone who graduated in 2008, I understand.
You will know the feeling. Yeah. So the bursary turned out to be an absolute blessing. I then worked for that company. They were called Eagle Star in a place called Cheltenham. So I lived in provincial England, which was beautiful. Cheltenham is in the Cotswolds, absolutely beautiful. I had a lot of fun. And then I did something very strange. I rang up a headhunter and said, I would like to go and work on the Isle of Man. And I could actually hear the person falling off their chair because nobody wants to go and work on the Isle of Man. The Isle of Man has been described as a wet rock that alcoholics cling to. So when she finally got back up off her chair, there was a why. Why would you want to go to the Isle of Man? And the reason was I realized I was enjoying life too much. I was having too much of a social scene and I wasn't passing my exams. And if I didn't do something drastic, that would continue and then I would never manage to finalize my exams. So I took the painful step of taking myself out of my social circle, far away to a wet island in the middle of the Irish Sea.
Gosh.
And I am very proud to say that it worked because I was the Manx Actuarial Society Student of the Year that year. So it did actually work. And I passed a couple more exams on the island, but it really does rain there. And when I say it rains, when it rains, it's often with wind and the wind blows the rain horizontally. And there's nothing you can do. No umbrella will help you from horizontal rain. So I'm sitting at my desk one day looking up and the rain is literally blowing past the window and an email pops into my email box, which was, I'm an old guy. Email was just about a coming thing, and generally it was inside the company. So this was an international email. And it came from a friend of mine who was working in Cape Town. And he said he's just spoken to a guy in the office next door, and the guy has a job, and he thinks that job might suit me, if I was interested. And I thought, okay. And I looked up, and the rain's going past the window horizontally. And I looked back down, and at the end of the email, he says, "Don't worry about replying quickly. I'm off down the beach to play volleyball." And I thought,
Was that a Friday afternoon at Old Mutual?
again, this is 20 years ago, odd years ago. I think it was a Friday. It might have been. I don't know. I can't remember that. But that was enough for me to say, I don't think I want to be here. I think I want to be there. And yeah, I was lucky enough to get appointed into the role. And it turned out it was a role in Old Mutual, which has been a fantastic employer for me. They gave me lots of experience in many different business units. And I arrived in South Africa on the 27th of June, 1998. I got off the plane on a Sunday morning, first time in the country, and I turned up for work Monday morning in Pineland's head office. So that was my journey. And when I reflect on that, I have now been living in South Africa longer than I lived in Ireland. Then you begin to say, well, where am I from? But I'm from the country whose rugby team I support, and that's the green jerseys, but unfortunately some with shamrocks, not Springboks. So
the Shamrocks, the Irish team. Okay.
I support the Irish rugby team. My son has a choice. We can cover that another time. But yeah, so that was my kind of career progression to here.
What's the next book we're going to discuss?
The next book, they got out of order. I think I'll do The Hare with the Amber Eyes next.
Oh, this is the one I've read. So
yes, and this was recommended. This was recommended to me by a friend. He recommended 2 books, both of which were fantastic. But I quite enjoyed this one, and this is a story of a family like the. Name escapes me. Name escapes me now, but a wealthy family of bankers who everyone will have heard of. The Rothschilds. So this family rivaled the Rothschilds at the time, but nobody knows this family. And this book charts the family history coming from, let's call it, provincial bankers in the Ukraine, of all places, rising to having banks in Paris and Vienna, and then the decline of the family, which was a bit sad. And it's the story told through a collection of Yatsukis? Netsukis, which, if you're ever in Cape Town and you go to the Jewish Museum, there's a collection of Netsukis in the Jewish Museum in Cape Town.
From this family, what was the German name? Euphrasia.
Yes. Euphrasia.
Okay.
I think it's a different collection.
Okay.
But that would be very interesting. Anyway, so this book charts the family history. And again, it's linked to real history. It also covers the 20th century, so it falls into my desired themes. And it's real people, although people who are this wealthy, I'm not sure you can call them real people. But there was 2 interesting stories in here. So one is, there's a piece in the book where he talks about so there's a whole story of wealth in families goes from shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. Meaning the first generation make it, second generation spend it, and by the time the third generation come along, they're back working again because there's no money. So in this story, there is, I think it's second, third generation maybe. He's living in a beautiful house in Paris, and he has, as rich people do, he has artists sponsoring the arts, and he's there's a word for it, the Medicis were one as well, can't remember the word, sponsoring artists in his salon, one of whom was Renoir. And there's a story in the book how this character appears in one of his Renoir paintings. And I was fascinated by this, straight onto the internet, pull up the picture, and sure enough, there in the background of the painting is the guy with the tall, dark hat that he describes. And I thought to myself, that's astonishing. I'm reading about a real-life person, how he got into a painting that is such a famous painting, The Bathers, by King's Renoir. That was interesting. But the reason I brought the book along is sometimes when we think about politics, we think about history, we forget there are real people involved. And the one character in this book, he's a banker, and he's very wealthy prior to World War I, living in Vienna, which was then the capital of the Habsburg Empire. And he made a bad call. He lent a lot of money to the Austrian Emperor. Now, unfortunately, as you know the history, the Austrian Emperor lost the war. And that had catastrophic consequences because, the losers never get paid back what they loaned. It's the winners that win. So he basically lost his fortune. And then between the wars, he rebuilt his fortune again. And when I say these people were wealthy, they had a palace on one of Vienna's premier streets. And the Second World War comes along, and they are a Jewish family, And they had started off as Russians, but they'd renounced their Russian citizenship. And this is important for this piece of the story. He became a citizen of the Austrian Empire. Now, obviously, after World War I, the Austrian Empire had ceased to exist, and now you had a sovereign state, Austria, on the southern borders of Germany. And as people will know, Hitler was born in Austria. So one of his first political acts was to basically grab Austria. They called it the Anschluss. Hitler's argument was that these Austrians are really Germans anyway, and they want to join us. So now the people, particularly the Jewish people living in Austria, actually were probably the first ones to feel the real pain from the Nazis' anti-Semitic policies. But, and one of the things was if you were wealthy, you could kind of buy your ticket out, but you basically had to shed all of your wealth. So this man, Afrussi, had a very, she sounded like quite a strident daughter, who did kind of lots of maneuvering and whatever. And he paid up the money, and they had a holiday home in, sounds like it was at the confluence of Austria, Czechoslovakia, and Germany. So think about a little place, a bit like we have the place here in South Africa that's got Zim, Botswana, whatever. So think like that. And he managed to get from Vienna across the Austrian border, with a view to stepping from Austria to get, across the Czech border, with a view to getting from Czechoslovakia to London to his family. But when he crossed the border from Austria to Czechoslovakia, it coincided with Hitler's annexation of Sudetenland, which was part of Czechoslovakia. And as he arrived in Czechoslovakia, Czechoslovakia ceased to exist. And he arrived with a citizenship from Austria, which had also ceased to exist. So he was now in a scenario where he was in a country that wasn't the one he aimed for. He was back in Germany, I suppose, but he wasn't a citizen. And he had renounced his Russian citizenship. So he now had this bizarre scenario where he's in a country that doesn't exist. He's a citizen that doesn't exist under a regime that were basically trying to exterminate the Jewish people. So I just thought that was such a bizarre confluence of events that it stuck with me. But this idea that, what's going on around you sometimes is not in your control. And although they were very powerful and very wealthy, it didn't really benefit him. In the long run, it did. One of his wealthy people, they managed to get him on a plane. They managed to get him a one-way passport out of, I suppose, Sudetenland on a plane. And I suppose in those days, to get on a pre-war plane was a significant expense. So they clearly did have their money. But yeah, so he did survive and got to Britain to reunite with his children and grandchildren. But I just thought it was such a sad story and so unlucky that, with all the best planning, sometimes world events can go against you. But it is a really good book charting the history of a family that maybe not be so well known. And it's pretty well written by the heir.
Yes, I remember the author is related to...
He is. So although his name is Dewal, his mother was an Afrussi.
Okay.
So she's the very strident academic. She was an academic lawyer. And she actually went back after the war to try and reclaim some of their assets and whatever. But it didn't come to. But it's a really nice book, The Hare with the Amber Eyes.
What was the other book that your friend recommended?
The other book was A Gentleman in Moscow.
Okay. That's made it onto the podcast before.
And I struggled very hard to find books that hadn't made it on the podcast. But maybe if you don't ask me about my reading earlier. So I've realized I'm a little bit of a collector. So I will get my teeth into a theme. So as a child, I would go and read. I started with Enid Blyton reading The Secret Seven. And there are, from memory, I think 12 of those. So I had to have all 12. Then I started reading The Famous Five, and I know there's 21 of those because I had to have all 21. Then I read The Hardy Boys. So I read the entire sequence of The Hardy Boys, and again, there's 20 or 30 of those. Never got into Nancy Drew. My brother read Nancy Drew, but I didn't. But this idea in my reading that I almost have to complete the collection. So having read A Gentleman in Moscow by Amor Towles, he has written some other books. And I then made it my mission to find the other books, and I've read all of Amor Towles' books.
You mentioned, one of the themes of The Hare with the Amber Eyes about, the role of luck in life. And I think it may come up in your later books, not attaching your happiness to specific things. I wonder if that's a theme that we're going to get into.
When I reflect on my entrepreneurial career, people say, what's been most important? Luck. Luck is what I think differentiates the winners and the losers. And I have been lucky on more than one occasion. So definitely, I think luck is a huge thing. I do think, I was just chatting with someone in the office, I think, as Gary Player says, the more he practices, the luckier he gets. So you can, you know, I am of a certain age, and I spent my early part of my career in a corporate, which allowed me to build relationships. And I spent time nurturing those relationships. I suppose you could argue, call it networking, if you will, but not in a cynical way. I like people, so I keep in touch with people. And I think so talking to some of the audience who might be interested in the entrepreneurial side of things, I would not encourage you to become an entrepreneur straight out of university, because you haven't developed the networks or indeed the experience. So my journey, which was 20 odd years in corporate here and 5 years in other countries, that gave me a platform and a network, which then has helped me immensely in my next generation, whether it was being able to call on somebody that I knew was an expert and just, get their opinion in 5 minutes without having to pay for it. Or indeed actually convincing some people I knew in advertising to give me a quote for a brand because I knew they did that kind of thing. So the network has been immensely helpful. And I wouldn't be sitting here in my current environment if I hadn't had that step. But from there, that network was useful. And then it presented me with some lucky opportunities as we went along. So luck is huge.
And speaking of networking, I know you have views on working from home, or the shift towards working from home, and how that affects not only much broader things than just network. But what are your thoughts on that?
I think the pendulum swings. I think the companies that said, "Oh, we can all work from home." I read some really interesting analysis on that period, because obviously we lived through it as well, and we all suddenly got to sit at home. And I must confess, I was saying to my wife the other day, thank God we weren't negatively affected by the illness that was COVID. But I quite enjoyed spending 3 weeks with my family locked in the house and playing board games and cooking. I did some cooking then. So, I think that time was really valuable. Equally, however, I think if you're a young graduate joining a company, you learn from experience. You're an apprentice. I think it is very difficult to build relationships through the screen. It's very difficult to jump up and just say to someone, "Hey, quickly, tell me a bit about this." So, I think I don't think the work from home is a good thing for younger people. Obviously, for older people, you can argue you've made your networks, you've done your experience, whatever. But even there, I think, a corporate environment is they call it political. Political is the science of people relationships. So even in a corporate environment, maintaining the relationships of your peers and your team is important. And I think it's harder to do that remotely. But equally, for those of you who are looking at this using the video, you will notice I'm wearing shorts, which is, I wasn't expecting to be videoed, just for the benefit of those on the video. If you're not looking at the video,
blur it out.
Yes, please don't go looking for the video. It's horrific. But for me, part of the benefit of my entrepreneurial journey and having my own small enterprise is that you can set the rules that work. You have more flexibility. Whereas in large corporates, if they had flexibility, they might end up with chaos. The analysis I read post-COVID was quite interesting, that it said, in the early days of lockdown, when we were all at home, there was lots of commentary about, people are so much more productive. They're achieving so much more. This is the future.
The new normal.
And then I saw a piece of commentary that said, yes, because we were all locked in our houses. We couldn't go to the shops. We couldn't go to the movies. We couldn't go for a jog. So people were productive not because they were at home. They were productive because they were locked in. To say today that people are as productive at home is nonsense, because, we're all human. When the cat's away, the mice will play. So there are distractions, so I think corporates will realize that it doesn't work for everybody. I also think kind of, part-time in the office, I don't think really works. I think it causes more chaos and more disorganization. My view is the pendulum will swing back and people, but if we retain some of the flexibility, so like I said, in my business, I think that flexibility is important so that we work around the people. I think that's important. And then, if the obvious one is an IT engineer, although soon there'll be AI robots, but if you're an IT engineer, then your ability to work in your space that you've curated can be important. And your output is lines of code in a period. So, if you've got 2 days to write the function, at the end of the 2 days that the function exists, you've earned your salary. So I think that's so certain areas. And for some deep actuarial specialists, Again, if the output is the output, then it's okay. But even those deep, let's call them introverted actuarial specialists, I think are missing out by not being in the office.
As is the next generation who would learn from them,
Absolutely.
or who need to learn from them.
And that I think is the biggest challenge facing the large corporates, and indeed facing the young graduates coming into the workforce. I wouldn't, as a graduate, I would not go and work for a company who are all remote, because you're just not getting it. I just don't think it's right.
Agreed. What's the next book we're next?
So we may have touched, which will the next one be? I think I will do it this order. So actually, no, I'll do this one first. So that piece I just spoke about, being a corporate first and then an entrepreneur second. So the third book is called The Hungry Spirit by an author called Charles Handy. Now, Charles Handy has written 4 or 5 books, and they're kind of businessy, self-helpy kind of theme. And
Just come in handy.
When very Charles. They come in very good. I tell you, you should be a stand-up comedian, Pamela.
I know.
You haven't heard shows.
Calling.
Your perfect calling. So I read, and again, it's a theme. I have read most of his books. I've given some of them away to my friends. So I brought this one just as an example. But the subtitle of this book is Beyond Capitalism, A Quest for Purpose in the Modern World. And Handy was an interesting character. So again, he probably was a groundbreaker in his world, but he coined a term that he called portfolio living, or the portfolio career. So as an individual, he graduated. I think he had something to do with colonial Africa. He was employed by Shell, which was then, I think, quite a global colonial organization. So I think he was sent to Kenya, and he was Mr. Shell in Kenya. And then he got sent to the Far East. So he was like a real corporate manager inside a large oil company. And he decided that this wasn't the thing. This wasn't for him. And then in his latter life, he became an author. He did some charity work. He did some lecturing, teaching work, and did some consulting work. And he termed that the portfolio career, so that instead of having a single job 5 days a week, that if you could actually arrange your time to your benefit, that was both feeding your soul as well as, I suppose, feeding your family, then that was a better way to live. And that has appeals to me. And I suppose it's partly how I try to live my life and how I try to run my business. I do think if you can generate income by being an author, that helps, because you can spend 2 days writing your books, but your books are being sold every day, so you're making money. So it's not for everybody, but that idea that there is more to life than a 9-to-5 corporate job at the same place every day of your life. But I was talking to a young lady this morning that also had benefits. I know plenty of people who've worked their whole lives in corporates. And if the corporate challenges you and gives you different roles in different places, particularly for actuaries, it's a very valuable thing. You build lifelong relationships, and there's nothing particularly wrong with that. But if that's one alternative, and the other alternative is portfolio career appeals to me. And then the subtitle, I think, is important, that we can't, as I said, I don't believe in unbridled capitalism. I think, the world is not a great place if inequality is increasing. And as an interesting, you can tell I also like trivia. I used to know a friend who said every time I gave her a piece of trivia, she said, I've just lost something important now that's been replaced by your piece of trivia, because there's only so much space in her head.
One in, one out. One
in, one out, exactly. But as a piece of trivia, which has now gone from my head, what was I talking about? It was about, inequality. So I was talking to a friend at a braai one night, and I said, gosh, South Africa is now the most unequal country in the world. We have the highest Gini coefficient, which is in itself a funny calculation. But we were chatting away, and I thought to myself, I wonder what the Gini coefficient was in pre-revolutionary France, when Marie Antoinette was eating her cake and the poor didn't have bread. And I went and Googled it, and somebody has done the work. And guess what? Pre-revolutionary France, when 17,000 people lost their heads to the guillotine in about 2 years, was more equal than South Africa today. So, the idea that we're not too far away from social revolution is something that the powerful men in the world should understand, that eventually the masses will not tolerate the rich getting richer. And history has shown us that. So I do believe in let's call it limited capitalism and more sharing, which is an interesting.
On that ominous note.
On that ominous note.
So your main, I guess, part of the portfolio of your career at the moment is Meerkat. Can you tell us a bit about what Meerkat does? 'Cause I
Right.
feel like it's also linked to, upliftment, equality, financial inclusion.
It is. So Meerkat, I have a passion to bring financial advice specifically to the masses. And the reality is, for most advice models, the masses don't have access because they're not viable or cost effective for the supplier of the advice. So that has been something I have wrestled with in my career. And the other area I've wrestled with is simple savings. So there are barriers to entry for a poor person in South Africa. If you agree with me that the most cost-effective vehicle for regular savings is a unit trust account, for most of the unit trust accounts available in South Africa, the minimum is $500 a month. And
Okay.
those are old numbers that may have increased. If you can only afford $300 a month, you can't access that savings vehicle. Now, there might be other vehicles you can access, but they're probably not as good a value. And if you only have $100 a month, there is nothing you can access. So one of the areas I'm most proud of in Meerkat is we've developed a simple savings product, which has no minimums and no fixed costs. And that's another point I've learned in my career. In my career, I've seen businesses shed customers or close down business units because the business unit was unprofitable. I've often reflected on that, and sometimes those customers were really unhappy to be cancelled. They really, really wanted to stay where they were. And I've reflected on that. And I thought, I don't, if you have a customer who is prepared to pay for your service month in, month out, they can never be wrong. They can't be the problem. So the problem can't be fixed by firing that customer. And in fact, for organizations that do downsizing or right sizing, they soon learn that even a loss-making business unit is often contributing to overheads. So when you cut out a loss-making enterprise, you suddenly realize next year that the accountants have a deeper hole that they have to fix. Now they cut off another loss-making enterprise. But I often think about, well, if that client, and a term I've coined, if I ever get to write my own thesis, around cost to serve. What does it cost a company to deliver the service to that customer? And if that customer can afford to pay you a profit of 10 rands a month, well, then the challenge for you as a business or an entrepreneur is to say, can I deliver a service that is under 10 rands a month? So what is my cost to serve that customer? If I can reduce that cost to serve below the level of my competitors in the industry, then I open up the bottom of the pyramid market because they are currently unserved. But they're unserved because they're below the cost to serve. So my thesis in my business and how I run my work is to try and reduce that cost to serve and to get it down. So Meerkat is a lot about financial wellness and debt. And the other kind of epiphany I had in my corporate career was that a lot of the investments or savings or even insurance all deal with the positive side of your balance sheet. They presume that the customer has money. In my experience, the customer doesn't have money, and that translates into poor lapse experience, and that often loses companies money. If there's poor lapse experience, it's not just bad for the customers. People bemoan surrender penalties, but there's no company making profits. Okay, there are some making profits out of surrender penalties, but generally not. So that idea that, why do we have a persistency problem? Because people don't get up in the morning and go, I'm not going to pay my insurance this month. It's usually because they've spent the money on something else. And that led me to realize that debt in South Africa, particularly for the average middle class person, is a huge issue. But the banks deal with debt. They make money out of it. The insurance companies deal with long-term savings. The investment companies deal with long-term savings. Nobody deals with the customer holistically. So as Meerkat, our goal is to get people on a savings journey. But if you look at my website, it's a very low priority element at the moment, because I've realized that actually before I can get somebody saving, I have to get them out of debt. So we use debt counseling to take our customers from a negative balance sheet below water, hopefully to the surface. And then the idea is that on that journey, we've given them some financial education, and then they can start a virtuous savings journey from there.
What's the first, or I suppose most common piece of advice you give someone in debt?
In debt?
Yeah.
Get out of it. No, the first piece of advice, and this, I often say this to my team, you can't be judgmental. Why is, and debt in itself is not a bad thing. There's always good debt and bad debt. But to be brutally honest, it actually boils down to a budget. Somebody should give President Trump this message, but if you continuously spend more than you earn, in the short term, you can fill it up with debt. But at some point, people stop lending you money. And for those of you who follow the gold price has recently jumped from 3,000 to 4,000. And it turns out that most of the central banks in the world are now buying gold, whereas they used to buy US treasuries. So they are subtly telling President Trump that they're actually not prepared to lend him any more money because he's over indebted. And that is the reality. Back to your own household budget. If you spend more than you earn, you have to borrow. And if you do that month after month after month, eventually somebody's going to say, we're not lending you anymore. And that is the reality for many South Africans. So the first piece of advice I give somebody is create a budget that is affordable. Okay? So create a budget that you can live within, because that's the most important first step. And then from there, once I've got that budget, and this is the journey we go with our clients, from there with that budget, what is affordable, we can then look and say, well, for what is affordable, are you over indebted? And if you are over indebted against an affordable budget, then luckily the National Credit Act gives you a means of relief, which is debt counseling. Unfortunately, debt counseling is a very unprofessional business. It was a wake-up call I got when I left the world of insurance, where we have Chinese walls and ethical businesses and partners, etc. Debt counseling has a number of well-meaning, good-intentioned people. Unfortunately, it has also become a little bit of a place where people get preyed upon. So debt counseling, and this is, again, back on my friend who got stuck in a country that didn't exist. I joined an industry with the best of intentions. The industry's reputation has got worse each year I've been in the industry. Nothing to do with my efforts. It's happening around me. But debt counseling now is generally it. So when I start now talking about what we do, the first hurdle I have to get over is to convince the person I'm actually not a crook, and all the bad stories they have heard, they're not true necessarily, and actually it can be a good process. So that has been challenging. But yeah, so start a budget. And then it's actually quite interesting, as actuaries out there who are thinking about getting out of debt, we'll all go, oh, well, you pay the loan with the highest interest first. That's what you do. And that's, apparently I've realized now, is termed the avalanche method, because as you settle those debts, you can move the money on to the next one. But there's another theory called the snowball method, which is a smaller version of avalanche. And the snowball method says you settle the smallest debt first, even if it has the lowest interest rate. And what's interesting there is, because there's a psychology involved, that if you settle a debt and you can say that account is now closed and settled, you have a psychological victory. And that psychological victory often trumps the maths of the highest interest rate first, because people don't feel that so quickly. And that, I think, is quite a profound learning, that there's actually, it's not always about the numbers, it's about the psychology.
I think that's true in so many applications.
And if they hadn't been done before in this series, I would be talking about Daniel Kahneman, and I'd be talking about Amor Tversky and the books that they've written, which I think are fascinating.
Yeah. Well, what is the next book we talk about?
So the next book we'll talk about is by an economist called David McWilliams. He is an Irish economist, although he's quite a bit of a character. He also has a podcast, which you can listen to as well. In fact, that got me into podcasts. He was my first podcaster, and you were my second. Thank you. But the book is called The Pope's Children. And I bought this secondhand. I think I was in a book and I saw it and I thought, oh, that's interesting. Let me buy that. And it's not religious. It talks about Ireland pre the crash. So you mentioned 2008. So 2008 was obviously they call it the Great Financial Crash, whatever they call it now, the GFC. And people in Ireland were most exposed to it. And people will have heard of the Celtic Tiger. So the Celtic Tiger was roaring significantly before 2008. In fact, one of your colleagues in this office, I know, was in Ireland for a period over that time. And interestingly, he wrote this book around 2006.
Oh, gosh.
He's talking...
Is that the height of the bubble?
Basically.
Okay.
And in more than one place in the book, he talks about there's a crash coming, there's a crash coming, there's a crash coming. And it's so funny to me to read this book in retrospect, written pre a crash, which he predicted quite accurately in here. But what was interesting for me in here, and I brought it through because I am Irish and we are different. I speak English, but again, I support a different rugby team. And I've realized in life as well that your sense of humor defines your nationality. So my wife doesn't get half of my jokes. I'm going to read this one. Okay, so this one leads on to the next one. So he talks here about expectocracy. So how the people living in Ireland, and I'm no economist at any level, but what it basically boils down to, the thesis in his book, is that Ireland joined the euro, right? And at the time, all the different governments controlled their currencies, but now they're in the euro, so they ceded some power to Europe, but they had to fall within certain rules. But what he says in this book, which is quite interesting, is that you had a bunch of pensioners in Germany who were very conservative and had all their money in banks. And you had a bunch of banks in Ireland, and Ireland has a very young population. It has historically had quite a young population, a bit like South Africa today. And in the quest for yield, the Irish banks borrowed German pensioners' money and loaned it to the Irish young people. But Ireland is a small economy, and if you feed too much money into a small economy, you get a bubble. And what the banks were doing was, so I own a house in Ballsbridge, which is the Bishop's Court of Dublin, and it's worth €1 million. And no, I don't. I'm using an example here. I wish I did, but I don't. And I bought the house for €500,000 4 years previously. The bank comes to me and they say, would you like to borrow another €500,000? And the bank's logic was, it's secured against property in Ballsbridge, which is worth €1 million. We're giving him €500,000, but he takes that money, and because he has seen property values spike, he goes and spends it on property. I have a friend of mine, you might be listening to this, I might send it to him. He had personal experience. He is a friend of mine, and he works in IT in Dublin, and he bought a flat in Budapest, and he bought a flat in Nice, in France.
With that money from the
He
bank.
followed this recipe. He borrowed money from the bank because they would give it to him. He bought property somewhere else because property goes up, and he was building wealth for his family. And I asked him, why would you do that? What makes you think you can buy a flat in Budapest better than the guy living in Budapest? He goes, no, well, they gave me the money and whatever. And of course, it ended badly for him.
What is the final book we're going to talk about?
The final book, I'm sure you've Googled this because you probably hadn't heard of either the author or the book. So the final book is a book called The Tyranny of Merit, What's Become of the Common Good. And it's by an author called Michael J. Sandel. And Michael Sandel is a Harvard professor, I think. And his philosophy, and this is quite interesting to me. So on my bookshelves, I have a theme of happiness. There are some academics who have written books about happiness, and I'm quite engaged in what makes you happy. What is the source of happy? I find it in my personal life, my business life. But this book talks to those themes, but in a slightly different angle. And the reason he's written The Tyranny of Merit, and this is just like McWilliams wrote about Ireland in the early 2000s, this book is about America and the American dream, and how everybody in America is told that if you have the means, if you work hard, if you're intelligent, you will succeed and you will do better, and your generation will do better than your kids, and so on and so on, or your kids will do better than you, so on and so on. And he basically dispels that myth. That actually, because the corollary of that is, if you are not successful, well, then you must be stupid. You can't be as good as the next guy because you're not successful. And what he unpacks in his academic analysis is the fact that actually privilege is what feeds success. So you get into Harvard because your daddy was in Harvard, or you get into Harvard because you can afford the Harvard fees. That doesn't mean you have any more merit than the poor kid from the wrong side of the tracks who never got that opportunity, but you think you have because you got to Harvard. You think you got to Harvard on your own merit. And the reality is that there are plenty of people who don't get the opportunities by virtue of their social circumstances, which makes them feel like they're failures. So the people that President Trump, his constituency, the MAGA constituency in blue-collar Philadelphia, they feel left out. But yet they're being told that they're being left out, but they're in a country where anyone can strive to. Now, the reality is, if you are an unemployed coal miner in Virginia and the coal mines have closed down, you're not going to retread yourself as a software engineer in California. It's just not going to happen. It's impossible. But you keep reading on social media about all these people who are software engineers in California, and they're making their lives good, and they're telling you that anybody can do this.
Oh, social media.
Don't get me started. So I think social media is the work of the devil. But the point I want to make here is that it's this idea that, actually privilege is inherited, merit, and I mean it's a profound insight that if you haven't succeeded in life, it must be because you're an inherent failure. That's kind of the corollary of what he's saying. And that's, is not the case. It's just luck. We talked on luck earlier. So he talks about democracy and humility. We do not have much equality of condition today. public spaces that gather people together across class, race, ethnicity, and faith are few and far between. 4 decades of market-driven globalization has brought inequalities of income and wealth so pronounced that they lead us into separate ways of life. Those who are affluent and those of modest means rarely encounter one another in the course of the same day. We live and work and shop and play in different places. Our children go to different schools. And when the meritocratic sorting machine has done its work, those on top find it hard to resist the thought that they deserve their success and that those on the bottom deserve their place as well. This feeds a politics so poisonous and a partisanship so intense that many now regard marriage across party lines as more troubling than marrying outside the faith. It is little wonder we have lost the ability to reason together about large public questions or even to listen to one another. And that is basically, that is a definition of American politics today. And if you think even in the South African context, we have political equality, but we definitely don't have economic equality. And while we've made some strides, there's still such a long way to go.
What would you say to actuaries specifically looking for happiness?
I think, so I've listened a lot to some of your other podcasts I was listening to, you can't be defined by your career. And over my life, I've known people who devoted themselves absolutely to their careers and, in fact, to their employers. And, I've seen them retire and leave companies. And, it's the old thing, like, it's taking your finger out of a glass of water. The company, the next day you're gone. And so there's no reward for that sacrifice that you made. So I'd encourage anybody in career, anybody at all, to focus on the prolonged happiness, the stuff that's going to be there longer in your career, your family, your kids, hobbies. If you find joy walking along a beach in the morning, well, do more of that. In some of my readings about happiness, they say you need to find the joy in the small things. So if you like the smell of petrichor, you know what petrichor is? If you like the smell of petrichor, well, then as soon as you see a rain shower, get outside, because that smell is going to make you happy. So, and it's this idea that you need to be conscious about it. So back on luck, the more you put yourselves in scenarios where you enjoy and are happy, the more happy you will be. So don't assume that sitting in your desk in your office waiting for happiness to dance out of the air conditioning, probably not going to happen.
Wise words. So we've been through all the books. There are Stirlings Men by Gavin Mortimer, The Hungry Spirit by Charles Handy, The Hare with the Amber Eyes, Edmund Duval, The Pope's Children by David McWilliams, and The Tyranny of Merit by Michael Sandel. Sandel. You know what I'm going to ask? If I had to send you to a desert island with just one of these books, which would it be?
So I'm actually tempted to say none of these. You've asked your other people, do they read? And I have done most of my reading with my children. So I have read all 7 volumes of Harry Potter twice. He has
read them aloud.
Yes, aloud to my child. And in fact, I would have read them 3 times with the older one if they'd been around when she was younger. But I read bedtime, and I think reading is really important, particularly to children. Unfortunately, I'd hoped it would foster a culture of reading in my kids. It hasn't. But I did thoroughly enjoy reading the Harry Potter front to back, and in fact also Roald Dahl. The collected works of Roald Dahl are also very interesting. If I had to choose something from here, maybe choose the SAS one. It might be practical to teach me things to get off the island. I might choose The Hare with the Amber Eyes for the story, or Handy to help me with the psychology of where I was.
So basically all of them.
All of them. Yeah, I'm not a chooser. No, I think probably the SAS one for something practical, although it's probably not the best book in the stack.
Oh, I can imagine that's such a difficult question for a collector or
Exactly.
readers. To thank you for being on the podcast, I have chosen a book to give you as a gift.
That's very generous. Thank you.
I always say this, but I feel like you might have read it already. Do my Oprah moment. This is Paul Murray's The Bee Sting. Have you read it?
I have never even heard of it.
Oh my word. Okay.
I feel like I'm not worthy, literally.
Well, it's a nice, thick body. Although I read it quite quickly. It's set in Ireland.
Oh, wow.
During or after the Celtic Tiger bust, and it follows a family, and it's who were wealthy and then weren't. And what's interesting about it is that it's sort of more or less divided into quarters, and it's from each family member's perspective, and it kind of spirals down into a very kind of tense climax at the end. So that's quite an interesting way of being written, as well as being quite a deep stories.
Thank you so much. Thank you for thinking so deeply about your book. I actually think I have read another Paul Murray. He's written another piece about dystopian Ireland.
Sounds right.
So thank you so much.
And do you read fiction now and then?
I will read anything. I will read anything and everything. So absolutely. In fact, I have a book at the moment around Paris after the liberation, which is quite fascinating. Again, the theme of real lives. This will be next.
Oh,
So
can't
thank you
wait
so much.
to
I really
hear what you
appreciate it.
think of it. And where can our listeners get hold of you or follow your journey or find out more about what you do?
So I am on LinkedIn. So they can find me on LinkedIn, David O'Brien. There are a few David O'Briens. It's quite a common name.
We'll link to that.
Yes, but so I'm on LinkedIn, and the business is obviously Meerkat, www.meerkat.co.za. So I'm sure there's forms there, but LinkedIn is probably the best place to find me if people want to have a chat. And I'm always, I'm quite passionate about what I do. I'm quite passionate about the profession, so I'm always very happy to have a cup of coffee with people, chat if they've got questions, challenges, discussions. I find that's the way you also open your own mind.
And any last thoughts on anything that we've discussed today, or any message you'd like to leave with our listeners?
So you've asked other guests a question about what their reading was or where reading came from.
You're my best listener.
I studied. I have studied, Pamela. I have studied.
How?
I assumed there was going to be an exam. I thought a written one. No, so I was reflecting on my reading, and again, as a kid, and I don't know if it's an obsessive element of my character. My wife will say it was, but more than once, my mom caught me with a torch and a book under the duvet cover, reading the book. And in Ireland, you had to be under the bloody covers. It was so cold. But so I've always been a passionate reader. In midlife, I got a bit sidetracked with career and being busy and family.
Yeah.
But I've lately come back and I started posting the books I read on Facebook. And it's quite interesting how many people, because I was trying to get to a certain rate, like one a week. Could I get to one a week? Anyway, but the question, what would I leave with the listeners? I think reading is really important. And it's actually, I think children should read more. And maybe Enid Blyton is a bit dated and jolly hockey sticks and ham sandwiches is a bit out of it. But there are authors who come through. David Walliams is just brilliant.
I kept thinking of him when you were talking about Dave. Was it
McWilliams? Slightly different. I think David Walliams is brilliant. And there's my son read about space traveling dinosaurs. I don't know if you read that series, but it's just astonishing the imagination of people. But the point is, I think it's very sad that kids are maybe not being exposed to books. And I think books, the habit of reading a book, that application, the learning, just the words, the feel, the smell, I think it's a real source of joy. So going back to what happiness is, I think if you can instill in your kids that they should read books, then I think you'll have given them a real gift for life. And that'll be my thought.
Couldn't agree more. Thank you so much, David.
Thank you, Pamela. Appreciate it.